Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark, and we are in Ruth chapter 1. We're starting at verse 4 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, as we saw in the last few lessons, uh, Elimelech and Naomi and Mahlon and Chilion leave Bethlehem, the promised land, and they go to live in Moab. And they are there, and Elimelech dies. Now, at first, when they go to sojourn, just for, it seems to be for a little while. But then it seems in verse 2 that they settle down and they stay. So Elimelech dies now, and now it's just Naomi and Mahlon and Chilion. And we pick this up now, our study, in verse 4, and it says, And they, meaning her two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. Now, according to Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 through 4, marriage to Moabites and Ammonites was not really specifically forbidden in the law. If we go there, we can read Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 4, and it says, When the Lord thy God shall bring you into the land whither you go to possess it, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them, and you shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them. Neither shall you make marriages with them. Your daughters thou shalt not give unto their sons, nor his daughters shalt thou take unto thy son. For they will turn away thy son from following me, that they will serve other gods. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and destroy you suddenly. So, again, it's not specifically stated in that portion of Scripture that God told them to stay away from the Moabites. But in Deuteronomy 23, verses 1 through 4, and in Nehemiah chapter 13, verses 1 through 3, it was forbidden to receive a Moabite into the congregation. So you could marry a Moabite, but you could not receive a Moabite into the congregation. Even though Ruth and Orpah were Moabites, it does not mean that they automatically believed and did as the rest of the Moabites did. For example, here in America, just because, people live in America doesn't mean they agree with everything that America stands for. You have many people living here with different ideas, different purposes in life, different ways of thinking than the typical American. And it's the same with any other country in the world. In every single country, you can go there and find people who do not agree with what that country believes in or stands for. So just because they married Moabite women does not mean they automatically believed that Orpah and Ruth believed in everything that the Moabites did. Now, Orpah, we said her name means neck, but it's not 100% sure what her name means. But with Ruth, she's the wife of Mahlon, and her name means friend. And in the midst of Naomi's testings and trials, God gives her a friend. Ruth represents the Gentile people who will get saved because the Jewish nation left God's promises and rejected Christ as the Messiah. We see that in Romans 11, verses 11 through 21. So the book of Ruth is a picture of the New Testament, where the nation of Israel, during the time of Ruth, the nation of Israel, more than likely the reason why there was a famine in the land of Israel was because they were sinning. They had turned their hearts to other gods. And now, because they turned their hearts, Elimelech and Naomi and the family go to Moab, and they pick up this Gentile woman, Ruth, the Moabitess, and she comes back and she gives her heart to God and to the God of Israel and to the people of Israel. And so, in a sense, the nation of Israel's rejection of God, causing the famine, resulted in a Gentile coming to God. And that's what it is in the New Testament. The nation, because the nation of Israel rejected Christ, it has opened up the possibility for now Gentile people to come to the God of Israel and be saved, to come to Christ and to give their hearts to him and to become and to enter into the inheritance of the Jewish people, into heaven itself. So it's another picture of the Old Testament and the New Testament. Mahlon and Chilion seem to have been very fortunate not to get wives who devoutly worshipped either Chemosh, Molech, or Baal Peor. But moreover, we can see it as God's hand in choosing these two women, especially Ruth. So these two men are looking for wives, and they find two women, and they get married to them, and it seems to be a blessing. And it seems that Orpah and Ruth were not so dedicated to the Moabitish way of doing things, of what their beliefs are. And so now they come into Elimelech's family, and they marry Mahlon and Chilion, and now they seem to be influenced by the God of Israel, by Ruth and Mahlon and Chilion. And yet we see behind it all the hand of God choosing these women for these men. We do not know if Mahlon and Chilion, or even if Naomi, taught these girls the way of God. But because of Ruth's response in verses 16 and 17 of this chapter, we'll get to that here in a number of lessons, but because of Ruth's response in those two verses, it seems that she had some knowledge of Judaism and of God, and was willing to forsake any attachments to her life in Moab, and to commit herself to Naomi and to Judaism. So they marry Mahlon and Chilion, and again, we don't know how much Naomi taught them about the God of Israel, but we do know that they did know something, because Ruth's testimony here in verse 16 and 17 tells us that she committed her life to God, and she committed her life not only to God but to Naomi. So there was some kind of knowledge, some kind of influence that Naomi and Mahlon and Chilion had on these two women. And it says here, and they dwelt there about 10 years. Now, it's not certain if it means 10 years total in Moab, from the time they entered into Moab to the time Naomi and Ruth left Moab, or if it means 10 years after Elimelech's death. And it seems that it's the second one that it says here, and they dwelt there about 10 years. It seems that the 10 years began after Elimelech died. But according to this statement, it seems that they settled down in Moab, which we said last lesson, that they settled down in Moab. And it's very possible that had Elimelech and his two sons not died, had they continued to live, that they may never have returned to Bethlehem. They may never have gone back, because the implication of these words of sojourn and then lived and then here dwelt, it seems that they, in their mind, in their heart, they have settled down in Moab, all right? Some Christians do the same thing. They leave God and church when tough times come, and at first they have every intention of returning when things get better. But they settle down in the unpromised land, this temporal world system, and they have no intention of ever coming back to God or to church or to prayer or to Bible study. And you see that at times there are Christians come to God, and then tests begin to come in. God begins to bring in tests, and the people, some Christians, get out from underneath the tests and go back to the world, and they say, well, I'll be back. You know, once this hard time is over, once my financial situation is back on track, I'll be back with God, right? Or once I get a job, I lost my job. Once I get back with getting a job, I'll be back to God. I'll come back to church and to prayer meeting, right? Or once I recover from my relative dying, it was a hard thing. Once I recover from that, I'll be back to God. Maybe not. Maybe not. They have become satisfied with what this world offers. Maybe they won't come back. And maybe when they actually do get that job, or when their financial situation is now recovered and everything's back to normal, maybe, and now the thought comes to their mind, hey, it's time to return to God. Maybe they won't. Maybe they won't. Because they say, well, why should I go back to God? Why should I go back to that was the problem in the first place. And they begin to blame God for their problems. And they begin to think, well, why should I go back? It was his fault anyways. They won't say that, but in their heart, that's what they think. It was God's fault why I got into hard times, why this thing happened. And so I'm just going to settle down here in my Moab, in my world, and just live. I mean, I know they swear. I know they do sinful things here in this land. I know that. I understand that. But I feel comfortable here. If I go back to God, hard times may come again. And why do I want that? So some people, some Christians, they enter into trials and they don't like it. They leave God. And as they're going, I'll be back. I'll see you later. Maybe not. Chances are they'll never return. Why? Because as I said, they become satisfied with what the world offers. They know what they have in the world, and that's what they want. They don't want the possibility of God testing and trying them again. Verse 5, and Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the women and the woman was left of her two sons and her husband. We'll finish here, and we'll start verse 5 next lesson, all right? But until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.